The survey vessel made contact with the planet's surface at an angle that would generously be called unintentional and more accurately be described as catastrophic. Darya Kolvenbach had exactly enough time to think that the reinforced crash webbing was about to earn its considerable engineering budget before the world became noise, motion, and the specific flavor of regret that comes from trusting a 40-year-old navigation system. When silence finally reasserted itself, punctuated only by the settling creak of damaged hull plating, Darya performed a mental inventory. Arms functional, legs present and cooperative, head attached, though her opinion of that attachment might change once the adrenaline wore off. She unclipped from the webbing and immediately checked on her teammates. Chiish, the Trill representative, was already extracting herself from her specialized restraint pod, her 4 primary limbs moving with the precise efficiency of a species that had evolved in 3-dimensional jungle canopies. Her chitinous plating had taken on the deep amber color that indicated stress, and her compound eyes reflected the emergency lighting in unsettling patterns. Moran, the Seln expedition biologist, emerged from his moisture-sealed chamber with the careful dignity of someone pretending the last 3 minutes hadn't violated several of his species' core beliefs about proper atmospheric travel. His skin had shifted to a mottled gray-green, and the gill slits along his neck fluttered rapidly. "Status?" Darya asked, running her hands along the bulkhead to the main console. "Alive," Chiish replied, which was Trill for functional but displeased. "The ship has betrayed us," Moran observed, which was Seln for approximately the same thing. The console confirmed what the silence had already suggested. Main power offline, communications limited to a short-range emergency beacon, life support functional, but drawing from reserves, and propulsion systems achieving the impressive status of decorative. The vessel had fulfilled its primary obligation, keeping them alive during impact, and had apparently decided that was sufficient effort for one day. Darya pulled up the external sensors. Dense forest, high canopy coverage, significant water source approximately 200 meters east. Atmosphere breathable for all 3 species, gravity 0.93 standard. Local star classification suggested a 16-hour day cycle. The planet was uncharted, which meant they were exactly where they were supposed to be, just significantly more intimate with the surface than the mission plan had outlined. "Emergency beacon?" Chiish asked, her antenna angling toward the communications panel. "Active, but short range. Maybe 300 kilometers in this terrain." Darya checked the chronometer. "We were 4 hours from our scheduled check-in when we went down. They'll notice we're missing, but searching this sector could take days. Then we forage immediately," Chiish said, already moving toward the emergency exit. "Trill protocol, secure nutrition first, establish territory second. We should locate the water source and remain near the vessel." Moran countered, his throat sac expanding slightly. "Seln doctrine, conserve energy, maintain central position, await extraction." Both species turned to Darya with the expression, insofar as their wildly different facial structures allowed for expressions of colleagues who expected the human to cast the deciding vote in this suddenly critical debate. Darya stood, grabbed her field pack from the emergency locker, and checked its contents. Basic medical supplies, water purification tablets, a multi-tool that had been manufactured when her grandmother was young, and still worked better than most modern equipment, fire-starting materials, and a survival manual that someone had gifted her as a joke, but she'd kept anyway. She slung the pack over her shoulder and headed for the hatch. "We're going to the river," she said. "To wait?" Moran asked hopefully. "To clear a space." Both aliens paused, translating this through their respective cultural frameworks, and finding no sensible interpretation. "Clear a space," Kish repeated slowly, as though perhaps she'd misunderstood the human language structures. "Clear a space." Darya confirmed, unsealing the hatch. The forest was exactly as dense as the sensors had suggested, which meant navigating to the river required intimate negotiation with vegetation that had never encountered sapient life and felt no obligation to accommodate it now. Darya moved steadily, finding paths of least resistance, marking their route with small torn strips of bright fabric from her pack's outer pocket. Kish followed with the fluid grace of a species that considered vertical and horizontal surfaces interchangeable suggestions. Moran brought up the rear, his webbed feet making surprising little sound on the forest floor despite his bulk. The river, when they reached it, was exactly what Darya had hoped for, clear water moving at a pace that suggested both depth and current, a wide bank with mixed terrain, and enough clearing along the water's edge that the local ecosystem had already done some of the work. She stood there for a long moment, hands on her hips, turning slowly to take in the full situation. Sun angle, suggesting they had approximately 10 hours of daylight remaining. Wind minimal, coming from the west. Vegetation density, heavy forest to the north and south, more manageable scrub to the east. The river curved here, creating a natural eddy that would make water access safer. The ground sloped gently away from the water, which meant drainage. Several large rocks provided windbreaks and potential tool surfaces. "This will work," Darya said. "For what?" Moran asked, genuinely confused. "Camp." Kish's antenna drew back flat against her head, which was the trill equivalent of incredulous staring. "We are establishing a permanent structure. The rescue window is uncertain. This is inefficient resource allocation." "We're clearing a spot by the river," Darya corrected, already shrugging off her pack. "Whether rescue comes in 6 hours or 6 days, we're going to need water, shelter, and visibility. This location provides all three." "But the energy expenditure," Moran began. Darya didn't argue. She had learned over 3 years of working with non-human species that some concepts didn't translate well in abstract discussion, but became obvious through demonstration. She pulled the multi-tool from her pack, selected a blade configuration, and started working. The thorn vines came first. They had colonized the riverbank with the aggressive enthusiasm of a species that had never encountered opposition, sending runners across the ground and up into the lower branches of nearby trees. Darya cut them systematically, working from the outside in, clearing a roughly circular area about 10 meters in diameter. The vines went into a pile well away from her intended clearing. They were dry enough to be a fire hazard and thorny enough to be a perimeter deterrent, which made them useful in relocation rather than destruction. Kish watched for approximately 4 minutes before her species' ingrained work ethic overrode her confusion. She began moving stones, creating organized piles based on size and shape, without quite understanding why she was doing it. Her 4 arms made the work efficient, and her natural precision meant the piles quickly became architecturally impressive. Moran held out longer, radiating skeptical patience, but eventually waded into the river shallows and began harvesting smooth river stones, arranging them in a pattern that would later become a fire ring, though he didn't know that yet. Darya said nothing, just kept working. She identified the dead falls branches that had come down in some previous storm and moved them to a separate pile. Potentially useful wood went to one location, rot-compromised material to another. She cleared the undergrowth, but left several of the larger, healthier shrubs, noting that their root systems would help stabilize the soil and their canopy would provide midday shade. An hour passed. The clearing took shape, transforming from chaotic riverbank to defined space. Darya created distinct zones without announcing them, a flat area near the river for water access, a slightly elevated section that would stay dry even if the water level rose, a depression she'd dug that would serve for waste if needed, a clear sight line in multiple directions. Why do humans do this? Keisha's asked finally, taking a break to clean dirt from her leg joints. You create order in spaces that will be temporary. We have observed this in your species repeatedly. Why expend the energy? Darya paused, leaning on the branch she'd been moving. Does organizing a space cost more energy than dealing with a disorganized space over multiple days? The time investment seems front-loaded. Darya agreed. We spend energy now to save energy and problems later. Plus, she gestured at the clearing, the organized piles, the clear paths. How do you feel right now compared to when we left the ship? Morin tilted his head, considering. His skin had shifted from the mottled grey-green of stress to a calmer blue-grey, less pressured. Exactly. Darya returned to work. Humans learned a long time ago that controlling your immediate environment controls your emotional state. Panic comes from chaos. Calm comes from order. We build order. Keisha's antenna slowly lifted to a more neutral position. She looked at the clearing with new perspective, recognizing it not as arbitrary human obsession, but as psychological engineering. This is a survival mechanism. Everything's a survival mechanism if you survive long enough to do it again. They worked until the clearing met Darya's unstated standards, vegetation removed or strategically relocated, sightlines clear, ground level and stable, resources organized into accessible piles, the area large enough to accommodate 3 different species with different space requirements, but small enough to be defendable and maintained. Darya stood at the center of the clearing, turning slowly, checking angles and approaches. Keisha and Morin had moved to the river's edge, instinctively understanding that the human needed a moment of solitary assessment. Another thing they'd learned about her species, this tendency to pause and observe before declaring completion. What now? Morin asked when Darya finally nodded to herself. She pointed at the pile of dead wood, the ring of river stones, and the cleared flat area at the clearing's center. Now we make fire. Both aliens went very still, though for different reasons. Fire, Keisha repeated, her translator giving the word extra weight. You intend to create an uncontained combustion reaction. Contained, Darya corrected, already selecting specific pieces of wood from the pile. Very contained. The Trill encountered fire as a natural phenomenon 2 million years before achieving spaceflight, Keisha said slowly, watching Darya arrange kindling with unsettling precision. We learned to flee from it. Then we learned to extinguish it. Then we learned to harness it through industrial processes. We never, she gestured vaguely at what Darya was building. We never built one with our hands. Cell evolved in aquatic environments, Morin added, his neck slits fluttering nervously. Fire is philosophically opposed to our existence. But you understand the principle, Darya said, arranging progressively larger pieces of wood in a structure that resembled a small wooden tipi. Controlled fire is tool, heat source, water purification, signal, and psychological comfort all in one package. We understand it academically, Keisha admitted, the way one understands historical weaponry. Interesting, obsolete, potentially dangerous. Darya pulled a small salvaged power cell from her pack, meant for equipment charging, but serviceable for other purposes, and carefully stripped 2 wires. For humans, fire isn't obsolete, it's foundational. We've been building fires for something like 1 million years, long enough that doing it feels. She touched the wires to the finest kindling, creating sparks. Correct. The kindling caught on the third attempt, a tiny flame that would have been invisible in full daylight, but in the growing evening shadows seemed disproportionately significant. Darya crouched beside it, feeding it incrementally smaller twigs, building its confidence before asking it to handle larger fuel. She moved with the careful attention of someone tending something alive, which in a practical sense she was. Quiche and Morin watched with the fascinated discomfort of individuals witnessing something their species had evolutionarily decided to avoid. The flame grew, spreading to larger fuel pieces, establishing itself within the stone ring with contained enthusiasm. Smoke rose straight up in the still air, and heat began radiating outward in gentle waves. Morin searched for words. This is a controlled chemical reaction that you built from raw materials and are maintaining through observation and judgment. Yes, without measuring tools or automated systems. Correct. Just watching it and adding fuel when it seems appropriate. That's how fire works, Darya confirmed, adding a piece of moderately sized deadwood that caught within seconds. Quiche moved closer despite herself, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. Her species didn't need external heat for survival, but the fire drew her attention anyway, radiating something beyond mere temperature. You said it was psychological comfort. Among other things, why would watching controlled combustion provide comfort? Darya settled into a sitting position on one of the larger rocks. Quiche had moved earlier, watching the flames establish themselves into steady burning. Because fire means humans are present. For 1,000,000 years, if you saw fire, you knew your people were there. Safety, food, warmth, community, all tied to that light. We're wired to find it reassuring. Even though it could easily spread and consume this entire clearing if mismanaged, Morin pointed out, though he'd also moved closer, especially because of that. Darya glanced at him. Comfort doesn't come from the absence of danger. It comes from successfully managing danger. Fire is dangerous, so controlling it proves competence. The aliens fell silent, processing this through their respective cultural frameworks. The Trill had achieved sentience by building cooperative networks and avoiding environmental hazards. The Seln had evolved through adaptation and chemical resistance, becoming immune to their environment's dangers rather than controlling them. Humans, apparently, had decided that the correct response to a dangerous universe was to domesticate pieces of it and carry them around as proof of capability. The fire settled into steady burning, and Darya stood to perform her next assessment. She'd noticed several plant types during the clearing process, and now she moved through the area with methodical attention, examining leaves, checking root systems, testing flexibility and structure. Quiche and Morin remained by the fire, still processing its existence. We should locate food sources, Quiche said eventually, remembering her original priority. I consumed several plant types during the clearing process. 2 were nutritious, 1 was neutral, 1 caused mild digestive discomfort. You just ate random plants, Darya called from where she was examining a tuberous growth. Trill metabolism is highly adaptable. The discomfort will pass, or intensify and kill you, Darya muttered, but quietly enough that it might have been to herself. She returned to the fire, carrying several items, 3 of the tuberous roots, a cluster of fungi growing on a dead log, and a collection of leaves from a plant she'd marked earlier. We're going to test these properly. Properly? Morin asked. Carefully. Darya arranged her finds on a flat rock near the fire and pulled out her multi-tool. First rule of unfamiliar food: assume it's dangerous until proven otherwise. She cut a small section of the root, examined its interior, and rubbed a tiny amount on her inner forearm. Gisheij and Morin watched with the patience of scientists observing an experiment conducted by a particularly cautious colleague. After 5 minutes with no reaction, Darya touched the root juice to her lips. Another wait, then a tiny taste, followed by more waiting. "This is going to take hours," Gisheij observed. "Or it's going to prevent me from dying in hours," Darya countered. Patience and caution kept humans alive long enough to invent impatience and recklessness. While conducting her careful testing, Darya noticed Morin returning from the river with several fish analogues, things that weren't quite fish, but filled the same ecological role, with streamlined bodies and fin structures adapted for the current. He'd caught them with his hands, which were webbed and quick, then had apparently become uncertain about what to do next. "I thought these would be food," he said, holding up his catch with something like embarrassment. "But I don't know how to process them safely. Cells normally consume aquatic life in its natural state, but our digestive system has specific adaptations that you lack." "Can I see them?" Darya asked, her root testing having proceeded to the probably safe stage without killing her. Morin handed over the catch, and Darya examined them with professional interest. 3 specimens, each about the length of her forearm, similar scale structure, no obvious toxin indicators. She pulled a flat stone close to the fire, cleaned it with water from her purification flask, and proceeded to demonstrate something neither alien had witnessed in person. She filleted the fish analogues with her multi-tool blade, removing organs and structures that might carry parasites or concentrate environmental toxins, setting aside the clean flesh portions. She cleaned the tubers more thoroughly, removing outer layers and cutting them into manageable pieces. The fungi got similar treatment after passing her safety tests. Everything went onto the hot flat stone near the fire. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. The food began cooking, proteins denaturing, cellular structures breaking down, and most noticeably, producing aromas. Gisheij's antenna shot forward. "What is that smell?" "Cooking food." Darya turned the pieces with a stick, ensuring even heat exposure. "But it's affecting my sensory inputs in unexpected ways. That's called smelling good." Morin had moved even closer, his neck slits fluttering rapidly. "The chemical composition is changing. The heat is breaking down complex molecules into simpler, more digestible forms, also making it safer by killing pathogens and parasites," Darya added, flipping a piece of tuber. "Humans cook almost everything. We're actually kind of bad at processing raw food compared to our evolutionary ancestors. We traded digestive efficiency for brain size and manual dexterity." "So you became smarter but weaker?" Kish asked. "We became smarter and then compensated for being weaker by changing our environment to suit us." Darya added some of the leaves she'd tested earlier, crushing them slightly to release oils. "Like cooking food so our weaker digestion could handle it." The meal finished cooking, and Darya portioned it carefully, remembering the dietary briefings from mission prep. Kish's species could process plant matter efficiently, but struggled with certain proteins. Morin's people needed moisture and specific minerals but could handle a broad range of organic material. Humans were opportunistic omnivores who could survive on almost anything that didn't kill them first, which was apparently the reputation her species carried in the larger galactic community. They ate. The food was simple, barely seasoned and prepared under survival conditions, but it was hot, intentionally made and shared. Kish found herself surprised by how much more palatable the cooked plant matter was compared to the raw vegetation she'd consumed earlier. Morin discovered that prepared food carried significantly less pathogen risk and seemed to provide more available nutrition per mass. Darya ate slowly, methodically, her attention divided between the meal and continuous environmental monitoring. She checked the fire, scanned the tree line, watched the river, listened to the forest sounds that were gradually shifting from day to evening patterns. She wasn't relaxed, but she wasn't tense either. This was simply the standard operating procedure written into human neurology across countless generations. Why do humans maintain these skills? Quiche asked, breaking the comfortable silence. You have technology that makes all of this unnecessary. Food synthesis, atmospheric processing, automated survival systems. Why learn to build fires and cook raw food? Darya chewed thoughtfully on a piece of tuber that tasted vaguely like turnip crossed with something more interesting. Are skills only valuable if you use them constantly? Efficiency would suggest yes, Quiche replied. Specialization allows for optimization, until your specialization fails. Darya gestured at the clearing, the fire, the meal. Technology is fantastic when it works. When it doesn't work, what do you fall back on? Morin's skin shifted to a contemplative purple. We fall back on. He paused, genuinely uncertain. Seln would signal distress and await assistance. What if assistance doesn't come? Then we would. He trailed off, the answer uncomfortable in its absence. Humans keep baseline skills accessible, Darya continued, because we learned that the universe doesn't care about your technology level when things go wrong. You need to be able to function at any level of capability, from starship to stone tools, because you never know which level you'll need. But you specifically practice these skills, Quiche said. Not just theoretically understand them, but physically practice them. Why? Darya fed another piece of wood to the fire, ensuring its continuation through the evening. My family used to take primitive camping trips every year. No modern equipment, just us and whatever we could carry. My mother said it was cultural practice, keeping connected to the skills that got us to where we are now. Like the Seln ceremonial tide songs, Morin said quietly, understanding dawning. We sing them at specific times, though the tides are now fully predictable through mathematical models. We maintain the practice because losing it would mean losing something important about who we are. Exactly. Darya smiled slightly. Humans never fully disconnected from our survival origins. We just built technology on top of the foundation rather than replacing it. The fire crackled, sending sparks drifting upward into the darkening sky. The planet's dual moons were rising, one amber and one pale blue, creating overlapping shadows that gave the clearing an otherworldly quality. Darya stood, performed a perimeter check, and returned to add more wood to the fire. That's when the emergency beacon died. The change was subtle, a background hum neither alien had consciously registered until its absence became obvious. Quiche's antennae shot up in alarm. Morin's skin flashed through 3 colors in rapid succession, settling on distressed yellow-white. The beacon, Quiche said, her translator conveying appropriate panic. The backup power has failed. They cannot locate us now. They'll notice we missed our check-in, Darya said calmly, adjusting the fire configuration to optimize for overnight burning. Search protocols will activate. They'll review our last known trajectory and deploy recovery assets. But without the beacon signal, they'll grid search the probable crash zone. Darya gestured at the clearing around them, the carefully maintained open space, the fire sending smoke and light upward. Which is why we cleared this space. Visible from the air, distinct from natural landscape, with a fire as a signal. We've done everything we can to make ourselves easy to find. Morin's throat sac expanded and contracted several times. But the timeline is now uncertain. It could be days, could be. Darya checked the wood pile, estimating they had enough fuel for 3 full days with rationing. So tomorrow we improve the water collection system, scout for additional food sources, reinforce the shelter, maintain the clearing, and keep the fire burning. Same as we'd do if rescue was coming in an hour. You're not concerned? Kesh asked, searching the human's face for signs of hidden distress. Darya settled onto her preferred rock, the one with the best sightlines and back support, and considered the question honestly. We have clean water, 3 different food sources identified, shelter adequate for current weather conditions, fire for warmth and signaling, and a cleared space that's defensible and visible. What exactly should I be concerned about? The aliens looked at each other, their vastly different facial structures somehow conveying the same realization. The human had systematically eliminated reasons for panic while they'd been focused on being panicked. Every action over the past several hours had been part of a larger pattern they hadn't recognized, because it operated across a time scale their species rarely considered necessary. Kesh moved closer to the fire, settling into a resting position that her species used for low activity periods. Humans plan for extended timelines. Humans assume things will take longer than expected and prepare accordingly. Darya corrected. Hope for the best, plan for the worst, and don't waste energy worrying about what you can't control. Moran arranged himself on a patch of damp ground near the river's edge, his preferred resting environment. When rescue arrives, what will they find? They'll find a functional camp with 3 survivors who maintained standards and didn't panic themselves into poor decisions. Darya pulled out her multi-tool, using its small blade to sharpen a stick into a more useful digging implement for tomorrow, which is what they'll expect from a professional crew. Even though we crashed, Kesh pointed out. Especially because we crashed. Anyone can maintain standards when everything goes right. Professionals maintain standards when everything goes wrong. That's what makes them professionals. The forest around them had fully transitioned to its night personality, filled with sounds that were unfamiliar, but not immediately threatening. Darya listened with half her attention, while planning tomorrow's tasks with the other half. The aliens gradually settled into their respective rest states, their initial panic replaced by something unexpected: security. Across the river, something large moved through the darkness, something that had been observing the strange creatures who appeared suddenly and began reshaping the environment with purposeful efficiency. It had watched them create fire, claim territory, and establish themselves with the calm confidence of apex predators, despite being relatively small and physically unremarkable. Whatever it was decided that creatures who controlled fire and organized space with such casual competence were probably best observed from a safe distance. It moved on, seeking easier opportunities elsewhere in its territorial range. Darya noticed the watcher, but didn't react beyond making a mental note of its approximate size and the sound of its passage through undergrowth. Observation worked both ways, and whoever learned faster survived longer. She added another log to the fire, ensuring it would burn steadily through the night, and settled into a light rest state that humans had perfected over countless generations, never fully asleep, never fully awake, always monitoring for changes that might require response. The fire crackled softly, doing what fire had done for humans since long before humans had words for concepts like survival or civilization. It pushed back the darkness, provided warmth that wasn't strictly necessary, but was deeply comforting, and sent smoke signals upward toward unfamiliar stars where, eventually, someone would notice and respond. Kesh and Moran slept, the deep sleep of individuals who had been certain they were in crisis and then discovered someone else had quietly handled the crisis while they were busy panicking. Their trust in the human, which had been professional and polite before, had shifted into something more fundamental. They'd watched her systematically transform an emergency into a managed situation through nothing more dramatic than clearing space, lighting fire, and cooking a meal. Darya remained by the fire, running through tomorrow's checklist mentally. Improve the water collection system, probably by digging a clean access pool in the river shallows. Scout for food sources, expand the search radius, maybe investigate those fruit analog trees she'd noticed upstream. Reinforce shelter. Kesh needed better protection from overnight moisture. Moran required consistent access to water. Maintain the clearing, keep it visible, defensible, organized. Keep the fire burning, continuous smoke signal, psychological anchor, practical tool. The same things humans had been doing, in various forms, for approximately 1 million years. Long enough that it wasn't heroism or innovation, it was simply procedure. The specific details changed based on environment and technology level, but the underlying pattern remained constant. Assess, organize, adapt, maintain, survive. Somewhere in the forest, a creature made a sound that might have been territorial announcement, or might have been something else entirely. Darya listened, categorized it as unknown but not immediately threatening, and returned her attention to the fire. She added a piece of wood, watched it catch and settle into the established pattern of burning, and allowed herself a small smile. When the rescue team arrived, and they would arrive, because humans tended to be remarkably persistent about retrieving their people, they'd find a cleared riverside camp with organized resource piles, a maintained fire ring, a functioning shelter, and 3 crew members who'd approached a survival situation with professional competence rather than dramatic panic. The report would note efficient resource management, appropriate use of available materials, and successful multi-species cooperation under adverse conditions. What the report probably wouldn't capture was the expression on the aliens' faces when they'd realized that human survival skills weren't interesting historical trivia, they were living practice, maintained across generations specifically for moments like this. That moment when technology failed, and the old skills proved they'd never actually been obsolete, just patiently waiting their turn. The fire popped softly, sending a small shower of sparks upward. They drifted toward the dual moons, briefly visible against the darkness before fading back into probability and carbon. Darya watched them go, feeling the heat against her face, hearing the river's endless patient work behind her, and knowing that somewhere overhead, search patterns were being calculated and rescue assets were being deployed. In the meantime, they had what they needed: water, shelter, fire, food, and a cleared space by the river where 3 very different species had discovered that survival wasn't about the sophistication of your technology, it was about the reliability of your basics. Darya added another log to the fire and settled in for the night, comfortable in the knowledge that her species had been doing exactly this for so long that it wasn't bravery anymore. It was just Tuesday, and the river kept flowing, and the fire kept burning, and somewhere in the darkness, the universe continued not caring about anyone's plans, which was fine because humans had stopped expecting it to care roughly 1 million years ago and had adjusted their approach accordingly.